We're all familiar with the phrase, we save the best for last, but the reality is that everyone today brought their best to us. And I would now like to introduce Esther Koch, whom I met by way of the Commonwealth Club, where she is a frequent speaker on the topic of Medicare. And Esther actually thanked me for the opportunity to present today because she's wanted to develop this presentation for a long time and had not found the appropriate venue. But frankly, Esther, thank you very much.
So it is my pleasure to be here, and just to give you a little background on me, the beginning of my career was very left brain oriented. I'm a Pricewaterhouse CPA, Stanford MBA, and Chief Financial Officer, but I reinvented my life mid-career as a gerontologist. I have a graduate degree in gerontology from USC. And in my business, Encore Management, I specialize on elder care advisory services, Medicare advisory services, which are very topical right now during the annual election period, and then aging advisory services. But regardless of what I might have done in my professional life, my greatest accomplishment was the role that I played to my mother during the last 10 years of her life. Yes, she too had dementia, but as I characterized her, she was charmingly confused. So I'm going to talk today. This is a caregiver conference, and my goal is at the end of this is to hopefully change your perspective on your role as caregiver. But I want to start with acknowledging that this is probably the most difficult role that you will assume in your entire life. And if you haven't figured that out yet, I'm here to tell you it is going to be the most difficult role that you will assume. But it is also a role that has the greatest potential for joy. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, creating moments of joy. I'm going to start with you as caregiver, then talk about your family, then talk about your loved ones, and then we're going to get into some moments of joy stories all about people who would lack legal capacity but definitely still have the ability to find happiness in life. So first of all, caregiver stress really is real. So this might be a picture of you and 60% caregivers are women, 40% men, but I think the pictures of women really describe how you're feeling. So that's when you kind of have it together on the outside, but really on the inside you feel more like this picture. And on the weekend, this is actually probably exactly how you feel. But the best prescription I can give you for caregiver stress, because we know what happens, it will be declining health to you, the caregiver, is creating moments of joy. But first, you have to take care of yourself first. So that analogy in an airplane, put the oxygen mask on you first. You have to take care of yourself first. And I'd also like to add an additional airplane analogy, which is the one of if the plane goes into a spin, which is often how you feel, you are in a spin that you have difficulty getting out of. The only person that can get you out of that spin is the pilot, and you are the pilot. So you need to take care of yourself first. And so I'm here to remind you to remember, don't forget yourself. So often caregivers know these things theoretically, but they can't give their self permission to do some of the things that they know they really should do for themselves first. Great example, Slate magazine, Dear Prudence, the Dear Abby of today. There was written in by a woman who cares for her elderly parents and also for her husband who's ill. And she said all she wanted to do was go to a hotel. She wanted to read books by day and binge TV watch on Netflix by night. And her husband was making her feel guilty about it. And so both Prudence and I would say you don't need to ask permission for something to do. If that's what you need to do, that is what you should do. So I'm here to remind you, don't forget yourself. So how do you do this? You have to ask for help. Frequently, caregivers don't ask for help. As we talked about, caregiving, the primary support structure is the family. The family is the first avenue of help, but one of the untapped resources for a loved one is friends. So if you are caring for a loved one and you don't know the names and addresses of their circle of friends, you need to do that. So that's an untapped resource. If you have financial ability, even getting someone in for a short time during the week to help with some of the physical, activities in a home can be helpful to you to give you respite. And one of the greatest underutilized resources in this arena is geriatric care managers. So you need to ask for help, and then you might need to set boundaries. So for instance, one friend of mine, Nancy, she's an attorney. It was very difficult for her seeing her mother every day. It was negatively impacting her business. So what she did was she now goes to see her mother on Tuesday evenings and all day Saturday. And she sets aside that time, and it has really helped her role as a caregiver. So you might actually have to set some boundaries. But again, you're the pilot, you need to set those boundaries. And what brings you joy? Maybe it's exercising with your girlfriends. Maybe it's drinking with your female friends. Maybe it's going away for the weekend. For the guys, maybe it's playing golf, playing sports. Whatever brings you joy, you need to bring that to your life. And it's not just joy, because it also could be peace. What brings you peace? Actually, again, for Nancy, when I asked her just recently, what's been the greatest help to her in caring for her mother? And her response was going to church. So at age 63, she went and got her first communion and got confirmed. That brings her the ability to have the patience to deal with her mother, who's a very difficult woman. For some people, going to a caregiver support network is very helpful. But for other people, that's the last thing they want to do. They need to get a break from that role. So whatever brings you joy and peace is what you need to do for yourself. So now I want to talk a little about family. Family is the primary support structure for aging. So this is a family that I grew up with. It's Ozzie and Harriet. And maybe this is today's family, Ozzy Osbourne. So I don't know, it doesn't even look as functional as it used to be. So the reality is, most families are dysfunctional. I applaud those who have a functional family. Most families are dysfunctional. Family ties are less strong. Our parents did a really good job with boomers in teaching us to be independent. Also, the fact that we don't live near each other, there's no longer a nuclear family. Not that that is necessarily dysfunctional, but it doesn't work as functionally. The other point is that priorities are competing. So when my mother performed her role as caregiver, she was a non-working housewife. That non-working housewife doesn't exist anymore. Most caregivers are working. There might be long-distance caregiving. And now that there could also be a sandwich generation. So there's very competing priorities for today's caregiver and today's families. And respect for elders has declined, particularly in the United States. This is not a culture that has as much respect for elders. So the bottom line is that the primary support structure for aging is broken. And there's also generally an overlay of anger, of guilt, of resentment with that dysfunctional family. And the breakout strategy for that really is forgiveness. You really have to get to a point of forgiveness. And that's forgiving yourself for the role you may or may not have played during your life or even now as a caregiver, because there are no perfect answers. Forgive yourself, forgive your siblings, forgive them for whatever they did in the sandbox or for whatever they're doing to you now or whatever they did in the past. And forgive your loved one. If it's your parents and you never got along with your parents, if you're grateful to be alive, they had something to do with it. If it's your spouse and you have children, they had something to do with it. So you really do need to get to a point of forgiveness. And the reason is that forgiveness gives you back your today and your tomorrow. Otherwise, you are lost in yesterdays and you lose your todays and tomorrows. And really, only forgiveness can bring you a life with no regrets. And I'll share my story with my mother. Most of my life, my mother was very competitive with me. And I finally, I'm not sure, when I look back, there might have been a triggering event, which was her fourth diagnosis with fourth cancer. But one day I realized I was part of the problem. I had always blamed her, but I realized I was part of the problem. And in a moment, I decided I wanted to take the high road. I did not want guilt, and I did not want regrets the rest of my life. So that's how I got to that situation with my mother. Regardless of whether she changed, I knew I changed, and it was for me. Because you've got too much to lose. Don't wait until someone's deathbed, whether that's your loved one's or yours, to really understand what's most important in life. Don't wait until the deathbed. You really have too much to lose. So, joy is in the moment, forgiveness is in the moment, but regrets, they will last a lifetime. So now I want to talk about your loved ones. So although your loved one may lose the capacity to remember, what they don't lose generally is the capacity to feel. And I would say that really when someone loses the capacity to remember, what they have left are those emotions. Emotions are one of the last things to go. Also, some of your social skills are some of the last things to go. But when you think about what's happening with a loved one with dementia, it's anger, it's fear, it's agitation, it's sadness, it's depression. Those are all negative feelings. And I would propose that that's the default, is the negative feelings. Your role is to get them to the positive feelings because they're not as able to get themselves there anymore. So I propose that your role is to get them to the joy, to the happiness, to the glee. That's your role. You also need to choose your mental framework carefully because they're going to respond to your emotions. They get that. A lot of this has been previously stated today. These concepts that they will connect with your emotions. So be conscious of where your physical and mental state is when you're with them. Also, words do matter. Dementia, demented. I would say my mother was charmingly confused. I didn't say she was demented. I didn't say she has Alzheimer's. I said she was charmingly confused. It really made a very big difference in how people perceived her and actually how I perceived her. And they're not necessarily in that state all the time. Also was mentioned earlier that there's going to be moments of clarity when they know exactly what they're saying. But it's important for you to be choosing your mental framework wisely. So now I want to talk a little about time. So as time goes by and as this disease progresses, what happens is that age regresses. So I don't know where your loved one is on this scale, but that is what is happening. Their age is regressing. You need to meet them where they are. They can't meet you in your world. You need to meet them in their world and be conscious that their mind is in tune to it's amazing how we can retain the memories of our past, but this is where their mind is. So as the disease regresses, as the disease progresses, age regresses. Now I want to give another concept of time. So in the ruler of time, I'm going to get you up to 78 years old, and I'm going to make that the past. And here's the present, and I'm also being generous to say that the future is up to age 95. The point being, there generally isn't all that much time left. So be conscious of that in how you are interacting with your loved ones. And the greatest gift that you can give someone is your time. And as precious a commodity it is to you, it's even more precious to your loved one. But time changes. It's in the moment. It is slower. It is not multitasking. No cell phones can come in when you're with your loved one, only for pictures, for no other reason. But the greatest gift you can give someone is your time, but time does indeed change. So don't get lost in the doing for your loved one that you forget the being with your loved one. And I consistently see this, that people get so lost in they need to do this and this and this that they don't be with their loved one. And for me, it hit me one day as I was walking out of the house and the caregiver was reading a story to my mother. This was at the time she was living with me. And I was getting the groceries. And I got like 10 feet out of the house and said, I should be reading the story to my mother, and I should be getting the groceries some other way. So don't get so lost, that I see this time and again, don't get so lost in the doing for that you forget the being with, because it's in the being with that you're going to have these moments of joy and moments of memories. So I propose that you have a new role. And it was when I was on an Alaskan cruise and I saw a gentleman that was probably in his 60s with clearly it was probably his mother, and it was his mother who was in her 80s and 90s. So I thought this was wonderful. Male caregivers, this was probably 10 years or so ago. And I asked, at a time when he wasn't with his mother, I asked if I could interview him. And he said, well, I would be happy to talk to you, but it has to be at 9 p.m. because I tucked my mother in at 8:30. So that was fine. I met him at 9, and I started with some innocuous question, opening question of, so tell me, how did you assume this role as caregiver to your mother? And he immediately said, I am not a caregiver. Because when I think of a caregiver, all I think of is something negative. If I think of myself as only a caregiver, at best, I get to neutral. But if I think of myself as if I think of myself as a facilitator of experiences, at worst, I get to neutral. So I propose for all of you to think of yourselves as facilitators of experiences for your loved ones. That is your new role. So now let's talk about how you might do that. The first thing that you need to do is you start with memories. Memories, memories, memories. Your loved one may not have current memories, but they have past memories. So what were the things that they loved? How can you open their world? You also want to have, so for a man, maybe it was military duty, maybe it was fishing, I don't know what the storyline is. Whatever the storyline is, make sure you have a lot of pictures of that in wherever they're living, so that those are going to be triggers and they will ground them. So it happened that for my mother, the memories that we had that I tied into, one of them was Hawaii. My mother was a teacher by day, professional ballroom dancer and hula dancer by night. She loved dancing the hula. She loved Hawaii. So as a matter of fact, this one picture here is when she was living in a assisted living community, and they were having a Hawaiian party, And we got my mother all dressed up, and she actually wanted to go up and dance the hula, which I never expected. The walker's not in the picture, but the walker is there, and the caregiver's right there in case anything happens. So, you know, I have this wonderful memory of unexpected my mother dancing the hula. And then here we have dinner jazz with the Koch girls, as I would call it, every night, and we would have the Hawaiian leis, and I could turn anything into Hawaii. The other thing that we worked on was memories with my mother. My mother had leukemia. I was very active in the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society in their team and training program. So I did a lot of endurance events, and if you notice the pictures here on the pillows, particularly the ones on the bed, you'll see them later in this presentation. These were things that my mother was an honoree for the team, and these were shirts that I wore for events, or friends of mine wore in honor of my mother for events. And this was also her room, so there was a lot of things, memories of this that I got to look at too. So it can also be for you. So what you're seeking to do is to make the ordinary extraordinary, whether they remember it or not. And that was difficult for me to get to, because if I did something special for my mother and she didn't remember it, you know, I was just heartbroken. And then I finally realized did she have joy in the moment, you know, in the present? That's what you're looking for. It's the joy in the moment, whether they remember it or not. So how do you make the ordinary extraordinary? Well, this is Marianne and her 97-year-old mother on her birthday, and so they did selfies. It's pretty ordinary things, pretty extraordinary for a 97-year-old to be doing selfies and somebody taking pictures of her doing a selfie. Here's another way to make the ordinary extraordinary. This is a cemetery. I take my mother to the cemetery to visit my father. And the first time we did this, my mother goes, "Oh, what would your father be thinking?" And then she just started giggling. And I mean, I didn't really know my mother had much of a sense of humor. So, and then she said, "You better never tell anybody about this." I have shared this story so many times, but we would go to the cemetery. We'd go to McDonald's first. I'd get her a vanilla milkshake. I asked her what size she wanted. She said large, and I kept saying, "Really?" Got her the large, and she drank the whole thing. And after that, whenever somebody would visit her, I'd say, "Well, why don't you bring my mother a vanilla milkshake?" So you never know when you're going to get something to key on. So you're making the ordinary extraordinary. But let's start with some basics. This happens to be my Aunt Greta at 105 years old. She look good, feel better. So this is for the women, but it also applies for the men, but more so for the women. And if you want, as you grow older, somebody to maintain the way you used to look, put it in your advanced healthcare directive that that's how you want to be treated. So Aunt Greta here is in a 3-piece cable knit burgundy pantsuit with her pearls. And my image of her is, I swear she had on black stockings and black Ferragamo pumps. If they had a Vogue for centenarians, my Aunt Greta could have been on the cover of that. So here's a picture of my mother. Even at this point, she cannot walk. She cannot feed herself. She's in a jerry chair. She has her earrings. She has her necklace. We generally had a flower in her hair. And she felt better just in feeling better and how she looked. So look good, feel better. This point I want to bring up is you really are panning for gold. And the story I want to share here is about, this is Pat and his family. Brian is the tallest. He's the head of this sibling group, good Irish family. And Pat has a very interesting background. And fortunately, Brian is able to spend quite a bit of time with his father, and they frequently have an afternoon tea. And he listens to his dad's stories. And one of the comments he made was that, you know I hear the same story, but I always hear something new. You know, it is the same story, but there's always a nugget of something new that I hear. So you never know when you're going to get a nugget, and you never know if that nugget is going to be about you. So I would say that you're panning for gold, looking for nuggets. So, some basics. The power of touch, it is really important. And if you think of your loved one and if they're in any type of communal facility, when do they get touched with love and affection? The power of touch it's just so powerful. So here's my mother and I. We used to put our foreheads together. I was always holding her hand. Every time I went to be with her, I was always holding her hand. So I encourage you, even if that isn't something that was done in your family, it certainly wasn't done in my family, but do it. The power of touch is so very important to both of you. The power of words. You never can say I love you too often. Now I learned this from my 10-year-old goddaughter, who would, when she was calling me, she'd say, I love you, Esther. And my family, that is not how my family spoke. So I was able to learn that at an older age. So I encourage you you can never say I love you too often. And if you don't know how to say it, use Hallmark. I would really encourage you to use Hallmark to say what you are not able to say yourself. So it really all does go back to family. So whether you have a large family or in this instance a smaller family, family is going to be the first place that you're going to find examples of creating moments of joy. We are social animals. That social structure, the people in our lives, it is usually family. That being said, because there are a lot of dysfunctional families, do not underrate the role that friends play. Think of yourself now. Do you have a lot more friends that you're closer to than family? Then make sure that that group of friends is not lost. So my mother had a saying that came from my grandmother, to have a friend, you have to be a friend. I think women do this better than men, but don't assume that this is just talking about women and their women friends, because this is Al and Napoleon. I met them when I was training for one of my bicycle rides, and I saw them every morning. Turns out Al was they didn't know themselves from work, but they met, they started walking every day. Al was in management, Napoleon was in the union, and so they would be, I'm sure they were out there this morning talking about who's going to be the next presidential candidate. So very involved. You know that if either one of them is ill, the other person would want to be there. So don't let your loved one's friends walk out of their life. Now, grandchildren. Now we know women would just love to have any grandchild around, but also don't assume that doesn't apply to men. And here I have a picture of Linda's father and his grandson, Linda's nephew. Aunt birthday, a good event. But the power of touch. You never know when you're going to get one of those nuggets. Pet therapy. Okay, we go from human beings to other beings. Pets can be an extremely important part of someone's life, and either a responsibility for an animal, or just the companionship, or the personal, just the feel-good vibes of a cat. Now this is Cheryl's mother, and this is Yum Yum, her cat, and then this is Doris. And Doris, this is when they brought in, when my mother was in skilled nursing, I met Doris, and she lived on the other side of the hall, and I noticed that her room had doors on there were dogs all over her room, and I said, oh, I see you like dogs. And her response was, I love all animals. I like all animals and some people. So, unconditional love, the importance, there might be pet therapy that might be at the community that your family might be in. You're seeing that more and more. It used to be that the pets were brought in a certain time during the week. Now you might see a pet at the community. So pet therapy. Music therapy. This has just turned out to be some incredible research, and if you haven't seen the movie Alive Inside, you really need to see it. It won the best movie for the Mendocino Music Festival, or the audience choice for the Mendocino Music Festival, and also for Sundance a couple of years ago. And the work of Oliver Sacks, who recently passed away, about music, how it taps into the mind. It is incredible what music can do for someone. That Hawaiian music that my mother would hear, it would send her away. This is a picture of, this is Marianne's mother. This is Mary. Would you talk about how she's open to something? This was her response when she was given this on her 97th birthday. Nancy's mother, when they gave her the music from her era, usually around college years, high school, college years, it was Frank Sinatra. She just started holding herself, closed her eyes, and then tears coming down her eyes. So it is just incredible the impact that music can have. If you've seen the movie about Glenn Campbell, he doesn't know who the president is. He doesn't know what day of the week is. He has amazing social skills. He was having trouble watching the monitor, but oh my goodness, he could still play music. So there's some, it taps into another part of the brain that is still available, and it can bring somebody out. And not only, while they're still totally present, but even at the very latest stages, it can be incredible. So I encourage you to see that, watch that movie, and there's a great story about Henry. I'm not gonna share that now, but you should learn the story about Henry. So, Take Me Out. This happens to be David and his father, and he took his father out for a ride in San Francisco, and he noticed there was a lot of commotion on the wharf. And it turned out that it was the America's Cup. So he said, well, you know, why don't we take a walk? And of course, there's no parking, and where he parked, he knew he was going to get a ticket, and sure enough, he did get a ticket. But they took up, not that his father doesn't recognize who he is. He gets the impression he's somebody important, but doesn't necessarily know who that is. So they watched the America's Cup. And David responds that in the last year and a half, that's the most magical moment he's had with his father. So you want to take me out as often as you can. So this is Linda with her mother and father. Linda's a long-distance caregiver. This is her mother. This is actually a wonderful story, but it's kind of, so many people are benefiting from this. So Linda's mother recently had to go into more of a dementia care unit. And this was after they were picking her mother up after the hairdresser. So the weekly hairdresser took her mother to go to the hairdresser, but then Linda would take her father to the luncheon where her father, you know, had lunch with the guys. So she provided respite for her father. She provided herself a moment to be with her father. She provided their mother the ability to look good and feel better. Actually, there in the background there is a hairdryer, but I cut it out of the picture. And just a wonderful, joyful time for all three of them. So, Take Me Out. Here's another example of, with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, I would take my mother to some of the training sessions. She was an honoree for the team, so other people looked after her when I was doing my walk. And then the other picture with the balloons, this is for Light the Night, where people with cancer hold white balloons, supporters of cancer hold red balloons, and I wheeled my mother around the 2-mile route around Stanford Hospital. My mother had a great time. So when you can do something, when you can take them out, make sure you take them out. Here's another thing, when they can go longer distances, because the distance they can go will be shorter as time goes on. My mother Memories were of Monterey. That's where her grandparents lived. So we found a picture of my mother's father, my grandfather, and we donated it to the Monterey Library. But one of the pictures that I took of my mother, and that was on one of those shirts, was my mother's favorite picture of her. And that's the one that I used in her memorial, for her memorial service. So you never know when you're going to get a nugget of a picture, too. And when you can't take me out, then you bring the party in. So here, the Hawaiian Theme with my mother and her boyfriend David. So I brought in guava juice, we had macadamia nuts, we had chocolate-covered macadamia nuts, and we watched the movie of Elvis Presley and Blue Hawaii. So then you bring the party in. Nancy's mother loves the Giants. She got a special sports channel in her so that her mother could watch the Giants. So whatever you bring the party in, come up with themes and bring the party in. So you make an event. Good things are birthday parties. We got a lot of birthdays within a family. So birthdays, this is Cheryl and her mother on her mother's, probably her 92nd birthday. And what did they do? They got some costume diamond jewelry to be really dolled up for the evening. This is my mother. Again, this was on one of those pictures earlier, one of those favorite pictures I got of my mother. And where we went was to the Cliff House in San Francisco. My family was, we were all born and raised in San Francisco. One of the things about the Cliff House, we used to go there when I was a kid. That was a nice restaurant to go to. But also there's these wonderful pictures of San Francisco. So I'm wheeling my mother around the restaurant to look at the pictures because those tap into her memory. So you make an event. Well, then there's Valentine's Day. And if you notice all the pictures in the background, grounding my mother with her memories. And if somebody can't remember, any day can be a birthday, any day can be Mother's Day, any day can be Father's Day, any day can be Valentine's Day. And we have Halloween. So this is Penny and her mother. They really love to get dressed up for Halloween. And this is when they were biker chicks. And this picture that really is Penny in this picture is Mr. Moneybags. And Penny's responses, those are some of the sweetest memories that she has of her mother. So I'd say bring in the clowns because a sense of humor does go a long way. I would also say the time value of joy, it really does only take a moment. And I'm just doing that right now. So don't forget you. Get beyond guilt or regrets to get to forgiveness. Don't get so lost in the doing that you forget the being with. And above all, become a facilitator of experiences. The choice really is yours. So may your life be filled with no regrets. May you see the extraordinary in the ordinary, and may someone be there to brighten your world as you age. Thank you.